Welcome to the Remindo training for the International and European Law Department. This training will target the setup of a test matrix and a valid test within Remindo. This is generally done by the lecturer on a course. The lecturer's role is to design a matrix in the test environment that indicates the learning outcomes, the Bloom's taxonomy levels, and the number of questions to be used from the question bank. And secondly, to create a test using the matrix. There are 5 resources that can help you set up the test matrix and the test. An exam preparation chart for Remindo, the checklist for quality assurance, a template of exam instructions, permissions to use Remindo as an author, and this access link. You should already be familiar with the exam preparation chart for Remindo, as this has been used to finalize your exam and also to input the questions in the question bank. The checklist for quality assurance, again, should also be something that you are familiar with, as it contains the information that you need to help you make the right decisions and the different choices that are available within the Remindo interface as you set up your matrix and your test. The exam instructions are just a template of what your exam instructions could look like. You must adapt these instructions for your own purposes for the exam. And we remind you that these were exam instructions that you should have already given to the key users, so you should have already finalized what these exam instructions look like, and they should not differ from what you have given to the key users. The permissions to use Remindo as an author are generally already established for each lecturer, but if this is not the case, please get in touch with a key user. And finally, the access link is the same link to the question bank. Access to the environment in Remindo where you set up your matrix and your exam is done through the same link as the question bank, which is available here. Let's look at the interface within the tests environment. After you've gained entry to Remindo, you come again to the same screen. This time, instead of choosing questions, you should choose tests, because we're setting the matrix up in that environment. Again, tests is available in 2 spots, in the upper right hand or in this middle spot. The interface, again, has a left and right side. The left side will have any courses and tests that are available within your faculty or within your program. And the right side will have the details if you have one of the tests or the matrices chosen. Sometimes it's hard to distinguish between a test and a matrix, and that's because the language that's used inside of Remindo tends to be a bit confusing in that it sometimes calls things tests, and then sometimes you see it referred to as a matrix. What I want to point out is that when you see this icon with the 4 boxes, then it shows you that there's a matrix that's above it. And you know it's a matrix because when you choose it, it shows you something that looks like this on the right side, which has the learning goals all listed 1, 2, 3, however many you have in your course. And then across the top are all the levels of the Bloom taxonomy that are applying to your exam. Of course, if your exam only has 3 levels, it may be that you've only chosen to show those 3 inside of your matrix. It also contains the total number of questions that correspond to each of the learning outcomes and each of the Bloom's levels. And then in this lower right-hand corner, this is the total number of questions that this matrix is set up for in a test. And of course, for now in our department, this will normally be 40. That's the matrix, but that is not the actual exam. So this is not the test itself. You can see in this corner here, upper left of the right side, you can see that it has the word matrix with the 4 boxes because that corresponds with the idea of a matrix. However, underneath it is another document. This is the actual test. And usually if it's done properly, it should tell you that it's a valid test. It should say that there are rules, and you should be able to see each of the questions that are in the test and then the level on blooms that it corresponds to, as well as the learning outcome. And by looking through this entire thing, you can see the actual setup of the exam if you were to toggle up and down. So again, the left side will have either a matrix or a test, and there might be several tests within one course. The right side will show the details of either the matrix or the test, depending on what you have chosen. And similar to other environments inside of Remindo, you can also look at the settings. You can look at the properties. You can look at any courses that the matrix is tied to. You can preview. This is an entire preview of this exam. You can generate a PDF file. You can do some type of an export, and you can also have statistics. We will now learn how to set up a matrix and how to create a test. As a lecturer, you're probably already familiar with the exam preparation chart. This is one of the tools that you will need when you're going through this process. And just as when you set up your exam questions, you may also need to use this chart or checklist. That's quality assurance checklist. And the section on lecturers has two parts, starting in this case with number 14, you can start to see the prompts that help you go through setting up a matrix. So you will look at whether you put the matrix in the correct course in the HHS bank, whether you actually prepared an empty matrix in advance with the correct number of questions, the proper Bloom's taxonomy levels, and the learning outcomes. Then whether you prepared a test using that empty matrix with the settings indicated in order to get the number of questions that you want for your test, whether the course codes are correctly indicated, and whether you allow the exam to be actually deployed, and that means to be available to the test players. It's also useful to have on hand your actual instructions that you have already given to the key users. This is just a template, but you should have already handed these instructions into the key users. Those instructions are then given to the proctors, and therefore it's important that these instructions that you have and that you use are the same ones that you gave to the key users. Those instructions generally have the names of the lecturers, the program name, the date that the test is going to happen, the duration, the location, the materials that are allowed, including any PDFs or links that are important. For example, links for the dictionary should also include whether students are allowed to use pen and paper, whether they can use the task marker that's from Remindo, and also the point allocation can also be set out. Once again, inside of the test environment, we will need to then ensure that we're in the correct course. Here, we're using as an example the course Introduction to EU Law. However, you should ensure that you are in the correct course. You do that by searching for the course on the search button, and then you will be able to find the course because the course will have already been placed in the system. Then after you're in the correct course, which you can see up here in the upper left-hand corner, you should say Add New Test. Again, don't be confused by the language in Remindo. Even though we're doing an Add New Test, this is actually going to be our empty matrix. We give a name to this. For this case, I'm just going to call it a test training example. But you should be giving this the name of the actual course and whether it's a final exam or a resit exam. You should indicate that. And then here it's important actually to put the OSIRIS code from your course. And then you must toggle this so that it is a test based on a matrix. So you have to change the default here to say test based on a matrix. And finally, if this is a final exam, you choose summative. However, if this were to be an interim exam, you would then choose formative. Here we just have a summative exam, and we know that we're in the right course, but if you weren't if you didn't have the correct course up, you should choose the correct course here. So the settings for the exam, you don't need to change this. This is just the normal cutoff rate. You should make sure that the score type says grade and that there is an application of a correction for guessing. So grade and yes here. And then the grade range should be 1 to 10. And you should round the score to 1 decimal. And you should use the normal rounding rules. Nothing else needs to be changed here until you get to the points where it says retries. This always stays at no if it's a final or summative exam. But here, for the duration of your exam, you need to give it a specified duration. So you press specified and you put in the total number of minutes. If it's 120 minutes because it's 2 hours, then you place that in there. It's also important that you have this now, the template that we talked about available, because it's here where you need to put your exam instructions. So you could go to your template and you can copy paste your exam instructions in there. And I'm just going to take all this out and replace it with my own instructions. And I save. And then it says add test terms and conditions. We leave this as the default of no. And for closing tests, we can just put in the words end of exam. After that, there are questions about the calculator. We'll just put in never for that. Test marker, this is an ability for a student to make highlights in the test. Generally, we allow all of that to occur, even if it's a multiple choice test. And then we always leave this as no, the student can freely navigate, so this doesn't get changed. We want them to be able to go back and forth between the courses. So for the evaluation field, this would be if you wanted your students to give you some sort of an evaluation and you wanted to give them a URL that they could go to at the end of the test and evaluate something in the course or on the test. For now, we're going to leave that as the defaults and not put anything in there. And then for the visibility to the student, again, this is going to depend on the lecturer's choices. However, in general, if you want students to get a feedback report, you should only check this if you've actually given feedback inside of your questions. And if you have not done that, then this should always be no. If you want them to see the answered questions that they actually answered, yes, usually this is true. Or you could choose for them only to see the things they answered incorrectly. But in this case, we think all questions is the best for this. And then of those questions, show the correct answer, yes, and then show the number of correct or incorrect, You can also change that to yes, show the score, yes, and show the grade, yes, and show the score. Area name, that's not necessary, so we put no there. And for the delivery, this test can be delivered to test players. It's very important to have this check, and that's because the test players themselves, this is like the way that it can be delivered digitally to the people who have to take the exam. And here where it says enable full screen protection, this is a choice that depends on what is happening in terms of your proctoring. So this can change if you're using a different electronic proctoring, and therefore as a lecturer, it's important to get the correct instructions for this part of the exam. Please be aware that what I'm going to tell you now is only valid if you're having the proctoring and it's being done through proctor exam, which is the case in April of 2021 for the quarter 4 exams. Here we need you to not enable full screen protection. So you're going to change the yes to a no here. And when you do that, then certain parts of the options go away. So we are now complete and you can save this. What you will now see is that there has been a new training example matrix added, and you know that because it has this look to it on the side. So we're going to choose it, which it's already chosen, but just make sure that you're double clicking here. And then we can see that it tells us this is an empty matrix. If we go to content, there's nothing there. If we go to settings, we can see everything that we just chose. So we can see that the name, we can see the Osiris code. And if we needed to make any changes, we could still come here in the settings and make those changes. For the properties, we're not going to find anything. We're going to see that it's connected to this course. And then there's going to be a preview, but again, there's nothing here to preview. So we can see now that we have created this matrix and it's empty, as it says right here. Empty matrix. To fill in information, we need to edit the recipe settings. Right here in the upper left of the right side, we need to check this. And then we edit the criteria. You can see it already has chosen Bloom's taxonomy, but normally that would not be chosen, so choose it. And then choose the number of levels that you want. It could be that you're not testing all the levels, so you may not need to check all of these boxes. Then you save your criteria. After you edit the criteria, you have to add your learning goals. These are the same exact learning goals that are found in your question bank, but you should make them in a way that allows somebody who doesn't know anything about your exam to understand what's going on. So one way is to do LO1 and then just a brief explanation. So explain origins of the EU. The weight always stays at 1, and then you have to select a bin. It should be the HHS bin, and it should be International and European Law. So once you've chosen that, you save your test goals. So you can see it's added 1 learning goal. Now you need to continue until all of your learning goals are there. Now I'm borrowing from a test that we didn't actually write ourselves, but that's because I want you to see how to do this when you have many test items in your bank, and unlike ours that we set up for the training purposes, which only has a few questions. Again, I'm selecting my bin and I'm saving. I now have 5 learning goals that are set up. I'm going to save this. And you can see that I have an empty matrix now. So basically what's happened here is I have a chance to change this now to what I want to do. So I know I want to have 16 questions on my exam. I've changed it to make 16 questions, but in your case, you might be doing an exam of much more, like 40 questions, and you may want to have them in other learning outcomes. I've only tested one outcome here. Yours will be across the outcomes, but you can see the idea. And then you need to save this test, because now this is sort of even though it says test, this is really just the matrix that's being used to actually decide what types of questions will be pulled out of the question bank for your test. It's been saved. I will add a variant. This is actually the test itself. So this, I want to copy all the settings and fix the questions according to the matrix. So I choose that. Below you can already see that it's pulling up the questions that I will use. And then I save. And you can see that it's made a test of 16 questions. It's also over here. And then if I'm looking at the questions as a preview, which is a good way to look at it, you can kind of see that what I copy and pasted as my instructions are there, and then my questions have come up, and I can see what they're related to in blooms and things like that. So this is basically complete. If I go back to content, I can save this test. Depending on what set of instructions you're given, you may also approve your test, or you may have to have someone else come in and look at it and approve it. But in this case, I'm going to approve this test, and I'm going to confirm. And now I have a valid test. It's now ready to go and to be scheduled and also to be looked at again if that's necessary. Let's review. When we set up our matrix, it's good for us to have on hand the instructions that we want for our exam, as well as the checklist. And as we're going through the setup process, we have to remember to specify the total time for the exam and to ensure that we do not include the full screen protection if we're using a proctoring such as proctor exam. We should do this by adding a new test in the environment and creating the empty matrix. Then we edit the recipe, and there we edit our criteria, adding the Bloom's taxonomy levels and also adding the learning goals and choosing things from the HHS bin. That allows us to come to the empty matrix, which we can then fill in and choose the number of questions and the learning outcomes and levels that we want for our exam. After that, we add a new variant. When adding the new variant, we're able to fix the questions according to a matrix, and then We can preview our exam as it would look with all of its questions, all the related Bloom's levels, as well as the learning outcomes. Finally, we can approve the test if that is the policy that we have been told through the assessment committee. If it is the case that another person would approve, then at that point we would notify them that the test was ready.